Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas, interviewing Elwood Smith.
Elwood.
Elwood, Elwood Smith of the 152nd Armored Signal Company. This is March the 18th, 1997. Let's start off and just tell me a little bit about where you grew up, who your parents were, that kind of thing.
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my father seemed to be able to keep a job all during the Depression and help some others.
What was his name and your mother's name?
Same name, Elwood Smith, and my mother's name was Ella Smith. And it was there I got that notice to report.
Well, let's go back a moment and go back to your school days and tell us a little bit about what you remember about going to school as early back as you can remember, all the way through high school. Anything you remember about that?
Well, I don't remember much, except that I went to Northeast High School at 8th and Lehigh and inside the city.
Do you remember any of your teachers, any of them stand out over the years?
No, I don't.
What did you do in the 1930s?
In the 30s?
During the Depression?
Well, I didn't do much, except I was growing up and playing ball and playing with the other kids around.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I don't remember what that was.
Okay. Well, do you remember, you say your father was successful at keeping a job during the Depression. What kind of work did he do?
He was a store manager for a grocery store.
What about food and that kind of thing? Did that job help your family in any way? Getting food, did employees have any benefits in that regard during the Depression?
They didn't, not that I know of. It was just a regular job, I guess. Although food was different, you know. I don't know if you remember the old scrapple and stuff like that they had.
What is that? I don't remember that.
You don't?
What's scrapple?
Well, the whole, half the meat counter on a store was scrapple. And that's a sort of a cornmeal with some kind of meat juice on it. They fried it. It was about all the people could afford. It was a cheap meat. I guess it's like hot dogs today, 100 different kinds of meat in it. I don't think it's that cheap, huh? But
Well, what did you do as soon as you graduated from high school? Did you go to work?
yeah. They let me go early, a few weeks early from school, if I could get the job that they sent me to. And I went down to get a job with the Philadelphia Transportation Company, and they hired me as a mechanic. But you start out, you know, sweeping, simple jobs. And I ended up being a first-class mechanic.
They trained you on the job?
Yeah, you learn as you go. And I was up to a second class when the Army called me. And after I come back after the war, I found out that all my benefits and everything kept going, and I still had the job and had been moved up to first class, which was good.
So you went back to work for him?
Yeah.
After the war?
Yes, I did. And I worked for him quite a while after the war.
What do you remember about the day that Pearl Harbor was attacked? And, of course, that's going to change your life.
Oh, I remember I was up at the old Phillies ballpark, and was a bunch of us kids there, and them northern lights flashing in front of your eyes, and I had never seen it. It's weird. And I've found out since then it was all over the country. They say there's no signs of things like that, but that to me was a sign, because it was right after that the news girl come for Pearl Harbor. My father was in bed. I went home to tell him. And he wouldn't get out of bed. He's telling me I'm full of nonsense there. Nobody had bombed this country. But darn, it did. And he laid there another half hour, and I guess it eat at him. And he had to get out up to see. He's surprised. That's what it was. I don't think anybody really believed anybody had bombed this country. And they did.
Well, what happened next to you?
Well, nothing much right away. I got the draft card, you know. And I go down and go off. Just like everybody else.
What do you remember about that trip where you went in to get your physical and all of that?
Oh, that was done by your local doctor. And he was the first one you had to see, and he went boo like that, and okay, you could hear, and they didn't turn nobody down much in them days. Only one person I know they ever turned down, and they turned him down when they was giving you the real physical. And they're asking him questions like, what, and he was a Mexican fellow, and they're asking him something, what's the difference between black and white, and day and night, and things like that, and he didn't do. But, you know, in the Second World War, they taken everybody.
What was your first experience with the Army? In other words, once you're accepted and you're moving for training, tell us a little bit about that. You're leaving home. Where'd you go?
Well, there was a railroad station, and I had to go there. And they put us on a train. I don't remember the name of the camp. It was in Pennsylvania.
Did you stay with any of the men that went with you? Did they follow you eventually to the 12th Armored, or did you just not see them anymore?
No, they all disappeared. 12th Armored, I met them first there in Camp Campbell.
What do you remember about that first training camp that you went to?
It wasn't a training camp. It was, and they gave you some more physical, and in the first few days they didn't do nothing about the officers and men. I mean, they didn't bother you one bit. And you was just there and getting the barracks, you know. And they gave you clothes that didn't fit. And then you went on from there. They took us to Camp Campbell.
So you went straight to Camp Campbell from this processing center. What happened at Camp Campbell? What do you remember about the train ride down? And
Well, I don't remember much about that. I know they gave us tests. I guess it was IQ tests mostly. I don't see how that can pick a baker or a cook, but it seems that cook picked out what you're going to do from them tests.
Well, the Army hasn't changed much. They still do that.
Do they? Yeah.
And it still doesn't matter what your skills are.
Yeah. They had one there that you listen to these little ticks on the tape there, and does this sound like that? And maybe that was what started the Signal Corps. I must have got pretty good with that.
You never had any experience with radios or anything?
Nothing on it, no.
Well, when did you first, not in terms of dates or anything, but what happened to you? In other words, when did you get transferred into the 152nd? Right away?
Pretty well, yeah, after that.
So
It was the 12th Armored Division, but they was all separate at that time, like, you know. Because each kind of an outfit does different. And so I guess they send us to that.
what kind of training did you undergo there at first?
Well, it was that basic, and that's just plain marching and hiking and cleaning up the galley. That was most of it, I guess. You know, every time you done something wrong, a boo-boo is in the galley.
You had no radio training or anything at that point?
No.
So you were just having fun?
Well, if you call it that. Getting you up in the morning, fall out, you know how that goes. And if you ain't out in so long, you're in the galley, and that means 90% of them. Peeling potatoes or whatever you do.
When did your radio training start?
It was after that basic. They start your training. And I think in the beginning, maybe they all pretty well went through basic together because it's all the same thing. It's after the basic that you begin to do the other.
What do you remember about that that training?
Okay, that ain't too hard. It's they set you in front of that little booth, and they have a tape with the Morse code on it, and you keep hearing that over and over and over, and you write it down or however. And you hear it so long after a while you learn it. Every day you pretty well listen to them tapes. And in time you'll pick it up.
Do you remember any of the sergeants or officers at the time that made an impression on you?
It made an impression on me. I had a staff sergeant in the cadre. And he was from Philadelphia, of course. We became friends, but none of the others in particular.
Do you remember his name?
No, probably would if I heard it. But that, you said you interviewed a King fellow at one time.
Yes, Richard King was the commanding officer, but he
was a major or a colonel or something, right?
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel, but he was not in the 152nd at Camp Campbell. He does not join the unit until Camp Barclay.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure who that would be at that point.
Uh-huh.
What about half-tracks and all that kind of equipment, vehicles, maneuvers, and so on? When do you begin to leave the training booth and begin to put it into practice in the field? Can you remember anything about that?
That was in Tennessee. And I didn't have nothing to do with the maintenance of them vehicles or moving the vehicles. I was just the radio operator. And it's just a half track, and you got a generator on the back that you pull for the power. And that's about all there is to that.
The generator, is that like on a two-wheeled trailer? Is it that big, or is it a smaller unit attached?
It's a unit in diesel, I think. You pull it.
Well, if you went and got into your half-track where you did your radio work in combat and training, how was that set up? Was there any other people in the half-track that had other communication jobs?
Well, there was other operators. One was Hayner. So I didn't get Hayner and Enstead, me, and there was another one. It was like a crew of 4.
Did you all do basically the same thing and just trade off?
Pretty well, yeah.
What about the job of driving and assistant driving?
Well, the driver, he was kind of separate. Of course, we knew him and all that, but, I mean, he'd done a different job. He was driving.
So they didn't waste a communications man on driving and that kind of thing.
Well, I never drove, no.
What's it like trying to keep communication equipment running over rough territory in a half-track?
I don't know. They seemed to do good. We had a few tubes under the seat that you could replace, you know, if they went bad, but them things held. That one we had held up all during the war, so I guess it's pretty good set.
What about repair parts and things? Did you carry that stuff with you?
Yeah, it was down with the under your seat there.
You think of anything else, any other memories of, let's say, the Tennessee maneuvers when you're out doing problems that comes to mind?
Well, I think that's where they, pretty well when you're first in it, you don't realize you're in a division, that you're part of a division. I'm in radio, I'm going to that radio deal every day. But at the same time, them artillery guys is going with the artillery, and that's a separate sort of thing. And the tanks, that's kind of separate, you know. And the maneuvers is where they bring it together. That you begin to find out that you're part of a whole division. You're not just some guy on a radio. And the division's bigger than what you think it is. And then when you have them parades and all, they bring it all together. But they do bring it together before that. And they're all together, but you're all with a uniform and you're marching like. And that don't make you realize what a division is. You just know it's bigger, there's more people. But you're not realizing that artillery and all this is going to come together and you all got to work together. It's got to be a team. And when I'm first learning radio, I don't know who I'm going to be talking to or anything else. I just know I'm supposed to do this. And there in Tennessee is where you'll begin to find out that the division is a big thing.
Well, did you, of course you were out in the boondocks, so you were bivouacking and you were working on problems. A little bit different than going back to a barracks at Camp Campbell. What do you remember about life on the maneuvers?
Well, not too much, except they keep you out and you stay out overnight and all that. I remember that they had them planes in Tennessee that went up and warned the people that the division was maneuvering, or sirens on them, or whatever it was, and then, like Friday, generally, they'd be over. They'd be maneuvering between two divisions or whatever it was. They'd holding war games, like. And then when it's over, planes or sirens that go off telling the people that the roads are clear. And of course, that's when you'd be trying to get to town or whatever after that.
You got some passes during the maneuvers? You get to see any part of Tennessee?
Yeah, I got to see Hopkinsville and Clarksville and a couple other towns, but that's it. Nothing much.
Never got to Nashville?
Oh, yeah, I got to Nashville.
How did people in Tennessee treat you guys in the 12th?
They seemed to treat you pretty good. They were mostly in tobacco farmers, and it's like cotton, I guess. You don't make too much. And it was pretty normal. They rented them fields, I think, the government. Because, you know, they built them slit trenches for latrines. And, of course, they covered them up and all, but they was running across people's fields of that they had planted and all that somewhat, not on purpose, and not much, but there was some of it, and I think they paid them farmers and all for that, so they was happy, I guess.
What do you remember about the move from the Tennessee maneuvers out to Texas, the trip out? How did that take place?
Well, I think they were packing all the stuff, and I don't know how. Just got on a train and went, come down here pretty well.
You ever been in Texas before?
No.
What was your impression when you arrived in Abilene, Texas?
Hot, I guess. That was the main thing. And I kind of felt like we'd get a lot more training here, but I don't think that was it. It was kind of just getting you together to go overseas. For instance, you know, to go overseas, you have to get them flu shot, not flu, but all them different shots you get. And then they had to number all the packages and different material with code marks. I remembered it on the train when you're going. We went up to New York, Camp Shanks, I think, or whatever was it. I'm not sure. But the train starts out, and it went quite a few miles toward the West Coast before it turned and went, you know, come back and went the other way.
To let the enemy know that...
I don't know what the reasons, but... And then Camp Shanks, is that the name of it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Camp Shanks, it's just a place where you disembark, and they had them blackboards telling you what ship you was going to be on and all that, and when it'd be ready, and you had to be ready when that time comes. Well, they closed off all the telephones, and there was no in and out of the camp after you got there when a ship was leaving. Other than that, they'd give you leave. You'd get to see different, you know, like New York City and so forth. But when any ship was leaving, they cut them telephone lines pretty well.
Let's go back to Camp Barkley and Abilene for a moment. Then I want to pick up what you're talking about, Camp Shanks and the voyage over. As you came into Camp Barkley, I'm sure you can't remember the first time you saw it, but what do you remember about what it was like, what it looked like, where the 152nd was housed? What do you remember about Camp Barkley?
Well, they had them barracks there.
Pretty nice places to live, huh?
Well, for a whole bunch of men at one time, I guess, is best you can do. And
could you describe the one you were in?
Yeah, it was 2 floors, I think. And you had a bed. Pretty well gave everybody one bed. And a suit, not a foot locker you got. And that was about it. Of course, there's still somewhat, you'd say, training and all. Oh, but the camp, the one in Camp Campbell, we was going to move out of there, I remember, and was on maneuvers out in the field. And we were supposed to leave on I don't know what day or nothing, but it was supposed to be right then. And they called the whole division back in and said that you can't leave a filthy mess like this, and they postponed us going anywhere. Gave the whole division this big flat nothing for the condition of the place, and They had to all keep cleaning until they decided it was all right again.
I think that happened at Camp Barkley in Abilene. You all were down at Brownwood on maneuvers, and the division was called back.
That's very possible. I just remember that happened. They called us all back, and what a big mess. And I guess they're right.
What else you remember about training in Texas? Obviously, the terrain is a little different than what you're used to in Tennessee. What do you remember about the training?
Well, I know there's some hills out there around here, you know, and they always had you up in them hills on them roads up there running around, and that is different than anywhere else. And they had you up there all the time, so I guess that's what they needed.
What about Abilene and the people of Abilene? What contact did you have with the people around town? Passes? What kind of things did you do?
Abilene wasn't Abilene like it is today. That's for sure. And they had one place is the biggest bar in the United States. At least they advertised that. And I guess that's where all of them went.
Was that Charlie Blank's?
Huh?
Charlie Blank's?
Yeah. And then they had a few fights with I guess it's over women or whatever it was. And then they put it off limits. And the stores that were here, I guess in 2 or 3 days, they complained, and it wasn't long, and it was part of your place you could go. But they did have it off limits for just a real short while.
What did you do on pass? I mean, what did you do for recreation?
I don't know if you really want to know. I went to Sweetwater. Thunder Ride, that's what I had done. Me and a couple other guys, he got killed in the war, Wojak. And we went to Sweetwater, and somehow, I don't know, I just met her.
You don't remember the circumstances?
Pretty well, we were just walking along, and she was too. And pretty well, how are you? And we got talking, and that's the way it went.
So you weren't very shy, is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know how you say it, but we met, and then there was 2 of them and 2 of us. And he seemed to end up with her, my wife, and I was the other way, and then I had said something to him, I'll trade you. And that's what happened. And that ain't the way to say it, but it is.
Now, the other fellow that was with you is this Wojak?
Yeah.
So what did you do? Did you then begin to start to go to Sweetwater on a very regular basis?
I went there every time I could. And I had to thumb it both ways. And this highway wasn't there, no I-20. I've looked for that road, and I've never found it again.
What?
Going here through this, going past here to Snyder. And on out to Odessa, I go by, and I always look to find where that road was. But I don't see it. Might be there, I don't know.
What kind of things would you do on these dates with your wife? By the way, what was her name at that time?
Betty Lou Dunlap.
And what was she doing there?
Well, she was working Western Union. Yeah. And she had a room, and she was working with Western Union.
Well, what was it like dating in Sweetwater? In other words, what was there to do?
Well, that's it. There wasn't much to do, and what we always done as soldiers, well, you know, more of them, you're always in the bar. Well, I didn't do that, so I guess we done a lot of walking and having a cup of coffee in different places. There wasn't much of that. Abilene wasn't Abilene then. Had that big motel and a few stores, and I don't know where the houses was, but it wasn't much. It wasn't even the university that's out here. That wasn't here. I don't believe it was anyway.
Yeah, they were here, but if your girlfriend is in Sweetwater, you wouldn't be all that interested in.
No, I wasn't very interested in Abilene, really, because all the time, first I could get out, I'd thumb my way out there.
Well, when did you decide to get married? What happened?
I think it just came about because we didn't really talk much about any marriage bit, you know, till the very end when I'm leaving. I didn't even say we'd get married. I just said, I'm going to be back for you. I'll be back for you, and that ain't much of a commitment, no way. But I did.
Well, what do you remember about those last couple of weeks when you got orders to move out? What was happening in the 152nd to get ready?
Mostly they was labeling that material for shipping. I don't know how that material got shipped, but we just got on that train. But
what do you remember about that last night?
Nothing, I guess. I just took it for granted that's where we're going, you know. We knew we was going for overseas, and we didn't know really whether it was going one coast or the other. We didn't know where we was going.
What about the train ride to Camp Shanks? What do you remember about that?
I think there might have been a couple of passenger cars on it. And I remember that whenever that train stopped for a minute, you could jump off and back. You wanted a cup of coffee or something, you know. The Salvation Army was giving the fellas coffee. And I think that Salvation Army was a good outfit.
What about going through some of these communities and farming communities? Were there ever people along the way, even while the train's rolling, doing anything or watching you lined up along the tracks? Or do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, there was, but most of it was that Salvation Army there. Them cars, you could open the windows. You can't today on them cars. And they was just pushing coffee in the windows, see? They gave you coffee. And I remember there was a couple other trains I was on. And that Salvation Army had come on, and it was hooked with passenger cars. And they made an agreement with the railroad or whoever's on there, the dining car, that after they had fed all the passengers on the train, they'd feed all the GIs for $1, which was pretty good. They paid for it.
Well, you mentioned a while ago that you arrived at Camp Shanks to get ready to get on the ship, and that you did get some passes into New York City. You remember what you did in New York City, where you went, what you did?
Yeah, New York City's close to Philadelphia. I don't remember where I guess I did. I made it my way down to Philadelphia. That's about 90 miles and back. I wasn't supposed to. You wasn't supposed to only go so far. Like you had to stay within a certain mileage range of there. But I took off. I got to Philadelphia and back. I wasn't sightseeing.
What do you remember about that visit home?
Really nothing much. I just remember that's how that air raid warden come in. They had air raid wardens, you know. Everybody's supposed to keep their lights off. And I bumped into him, and he started going all over me. And I didn't know nothing about these air raid wardens. And he goes around up and down the street looking in windows or trying to see if any light's coming out the windows, which is ridiculous for us way over here, you know, in this country. But they was doing it. And I guess every block had one of them guys that was pretty ornery or whatever, enforcing the rules, so-called. I might have been smoking a cigarette or something that wasn't just right. I don't know what it was I was doing wrong.
So you get back to Camp Shanks. What happens next in terms of the ship?
Well, they had that it was like a blackboard around, and it told you which ship you was going to be on and all that, and you just followed that.
You remember what ship you went over on?
No, Liberty ship. I know that.
What was it like? You remember anything about the voyage?
Oh yeah, I remember all the sick guys, and I began to get sick, and a couple of them playing pinochle, so I got playing pinochle just a little bit. And that cured me. Where others will stay sick the whole darn trip. And I remember in the bottom of the shit, or where we was, and they was eating, I had water on the floor. And it didn't amount to a couple of inches. But if the ship goes like this, you know, it can get fairly deep on one side before it turns the other way. And that was a mess. But they say they had all the pumps going to get it out, but they never got rid of it. And, you know, they had the tables for the food, and some of them lost their food, you know, with the movement of the ship. It would slide off. Well, I've learned since then that my brother was in the Navy, and he's a sailor. And he laughed at us after I told him, because he said they had tablecloths. And they wet the tablecloths and the food stayed there. Well, you know, we never heard of such stuff. I never seen such stuff. So we had a lot of trouble there to start with. You learn to hold on to it. But they was eating like kings, I guess, with a wet tablecloth. Of course, I only learned that later.
You remember anything else about the voyage?
I remember in that hammock I was in, or whatever you call them things, that the ship was rocking pretty good, and that water was going along around. And there was a kettle in the galley there, kept falling, and he must have kept picking it up, because it'd rattle around, and then he'd pick it up, I guess, because it'd stop, but only stop for a few minutes, and it'd be doing it again. Whatever it was flying around in there, I don't know. And I remember that, and all the sick guys and them waves. I never seen nothing so high.
Well, you get to England. What happens when you sight land and you get off the ship?
Well, that was Southampton, I believe. And they took us up to Tidworth Barracks. And Tidworth Barracks is a barracks there that was used in the Revolutionary War. And they had stationed their people there at that time when we was fighting England, as far as I understand. And now I don't know if it's true.
What'd you do there?
Pretty, I'd say, just survive, I guess you'd say. We got passes, and they wasn't training or nothing. And I know I got one of them trains going into London. I forget the name of the railroad station in London. Of course, I seen Hyde Park and the Palace, and what's that big church where the kings and all get married? I've seen that. And that I remember because all the people that's buried in it. They have people buried in there way before the United States was even discovered. That's a little hard to believe, right there on the floor. And in the sidewalls, different people. They're all mostly big Catholic bishops or whatever you call their rank. And one they got where there's a plate glass wall. I mean, when you walk along, he's under a plate glass mirror, I guess, or not a mirror, you can see through it. And they got the coffin open, you can see him. And he's laying there, and people walking over him all day long. I guess it's all day long, I don't know, but it just amazes you when you look at the dates. Can't remember the dates now, but they were way before this country was here. It was here, but it wasn't discovered.
What else do you remember about wartime London?
Well, nothing in London except Hyde Park, and them people in Hyde Park always getting up on a bucket or whatever it is, a little something to stand on, and talk politics. You can talk anything you want to talk about. People argue with them all day long. They're going to keep going. You're walking by, you disagree with him, and he's disagreeing back, and whatever the subject is, you go on and on. That's an odd thing.
What do you remember about getting news that you're actually going to cross the channel and go into combat?
What do I remember about it? Nothing really much, except, you follow the leader. I remember getting on the ship. I remember the biggest thing I remember is when they land. It was on this boat, and I don't know what kind it was or nothing. And we get there, and it has to anchor offshore. And you have to go down that rope thing they throw over the side. It's long, and it's just rope, You see it in the movies and all. And I found out that ain't as easy as it looks. You got all that gear on and try to go down that thing into a little boat they furry you. It was one of them LSTs. They open up when it hits the shore. And so many I'd get in each one. When you go down that ladder, it's a job, you need some training. When you step down to the next on a rope like that, your feet gets tangled, and You got all this stuff with you. It gets a little hard. And then that little boat that takes you to shore, you know, the boat front opens up when it hits the ground, but you're still in the water, so I guess you about that deep up to your knees from there on in, and that was Le Havre. And of course, the war had already got past there. That wasn't G-Day, nothing like that. So the only thing that I was amazed at is how the city, it looked like a fairly good-sized city. It was really blown to... I couldn't believe that you could blow a city where every building's just junk. It was all down, and you hear the bulldozers in the city. And they was clearing paths for these ships that were coming in order to move the troops out, to get them out the other end of the city, where you could assemble. You couldn't do nothing there, really. And it's really hard to believe a city can be blown that far down. That the roads, there's no road. It's just bulldozers making roads.
Well, what happened next once you got through the city? What happens to the 152nd? Do you all get organized, get your half tracks? What happens?
I think we got them when we got to that first town. I don't remember how we got them. They shipped them some other way. But there was that first city. I remember it when I hear it, but I can't think of it. It's a town that they had captured. And I just remember it's Thanksgiving, and they had a big cement slab there, and that must have been still there after the building went or whatever happened. And that was a Thanksgiving dinner, and it was cold and rainy and foggy, and they gave you a good Thanksgiving dinner, but believe it or not, you couldn't enjoy it. Too miserable. And then we pretty well got our vehicles.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you did now. Now that you're in combat, describe what you remember about those days.
Well, that was, you're talking about like Hiroshima and them. And, well, I don't remember much because they wasn't using the whole division, I don't think. They more or less, if I'm not mistaken, he's using like an infantry outfit of it and pieces of it. And it didn't get the operators like it should be. Maybe I'm mistaken. I don't know. I don't remember, but it, maybe you'd know. I don't know, but it didn't get operating like it did in the end.
Did you have any contact with the French people, let's say before Hiroshima, before Christmas, when the first days of combat, what was your impressions as you were going from town to town in combat?
Well, in that first place there, like I was telling you right there, the only thing I can remember about that's in my mind is that there was some kind of commotion that started everybody digging. It must have been a plane dropping a bomb or whatever it was. I don't know. And everybody jumping out of their vehicles with their shovels and starting to dig. We never got them dug, but I just remember this officer, and he was a fairly high-ranking officer, I think, but he wasn't one of ours. I don't know who he was. And I think this is the first taste of anything he ever seen. And he looked at me. I jumped out and started to dig, and he looked at me, and I think he was the first he ever seen anything too. So because he looked amazed, like he was looking for somebody going to dig something for him. And this didn't. And you know, it's nuts on you. And I remember it wasn't very many minutes, and he's out there digging. But that first look on his face, I know, I'm an officer, and somebody's going to dig something for me. He found out quick that nobody was. I guess I'm the only one ever seen that. But I knew that look on that face, that he's looking for somebody going to dig him something. And I imagine he didn't know more about what happened than I did. Nothing. We didn't know.
What about the French people? Did you have any contact with civilians, French civilians?
Yeah, I found they were friendly, except I couldn't talk to them. And I remember on the ship over, some of the officers had talked to different ones that had been taking French in school. Some of them, they said, oh, they had a lot of French. And I found out they couldn't speak no more French than I could with that pig Latin. They assigned them to try to find houses or, as we go along, places where they could bunk or whatever. And they were useless. They could speak French, I guess, but they didn't speak the French that them French spoke.
Well, what kind of things are you doing now that you're in combat? Do you remember in the half-track radio work, what kinds of things when the other units are engaged with the enemy? What kind of things are you doing?
Well, it was radio operating is what it was. And the company splits up sort of, Some go with this. And we had, I don't remember how many vehicles there was in the company, but it's a small company. And some went with this way with the artillery, some went with the tanks, and some pretty well was with where the headquarters was for the company. And it was GS 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I don't remember which one I was, but they designated different things like intelligence and I guess where supplies is and stuff like that. They'd more or less get that kind of information. And I found out since then, by listening to television, that the president's on one of them codes. Today. They get their information on a GS, whatever it is. I had just heard that on the news, But you want to know how you got the messages. Well, everything had to be in code. And you had this little machine that could do it. It was, I'm guessing 6 or 7 inches wide by 2 or 3 inches the other way, and it had a dial for the numbers. You get the numbers, letters. And then you had this SOI. You've heard of it, I guess. And on that SOI, it gives you the numbers to put in that thing for the day. For each day, you had different numbers. And you set this coder for that. And then, of course, you followed that, the code, and on-code the messages. And, of course, you was able to change it when there was interference. If they tell you that you found out that the code had been captured or whatever had happened to it, you was able to put in different ones, and everybody would go to that. But each day that changed on that SOI. And the SOI has one of the, I don't know why they ever put it on, it's just a little piece of paper, and it gave the tides and weather. I don't know if it was weather, but they gave the tides, sun up and sun down, and then the code on it and the password for the day.
What were your instructions to do with that paper once you had that?
Well, you're supposed to eat it. Of course, I never got to eat it. But I don't see it was that important because it changed every day anyway. And it gave you alternate frequencies. And as far as when the operation of the radio, the biggest thing I remember is the Germans, it would put on that, when you're trying to send messages, all of a sudden it comes on this here bagpipes. I guess you've heard of it. Well, it makes it where you can't hardly hear nothing, and they always play the same silly thing. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, there's more to that song than that, I imagine. But that's what they played, and it was that over and over and over, nothing else. It's that. And it gets you where you can't hear. It'll drive you goofy. And when it gets bad enough, and it can get bad enough, you got the other frequencies you can go to, and all the fellows know it, and you can send out the message you're changing, and you come in on them new frequency. It's clear until somehow they get to find you, and that starts all over again.
So they're jamming you with bagpipe music?
You can call it jamming or whatever you want, but drive you nuts and you know you can't hear nothing. You just try the best you can. You can get a message out of it, but it's hard. And it can get bad enough that you just can't do nothing. You got to change.
What do you remember about the spearhead movement to the Rhine River and moving into Germany? Did you notice any change in the way your unit operated in terms of treating the civilians, because you went from French to German civilians?
Oh, well, under the French, you could go in a house with them if they invited you. You was allowed to do that. But in Germany, you're supposed to chase everybody out. That's it. You wasn't supposed to be allowed to stay there with the Germany. At that time, you got under General Patton. He didn't stop long enough for you to find any houses. He's always going. I don't know.
Did you guys stay in that half track the whole time?
Yeah, you did in France too pretty well. Except I remember one time the woman told us that we could stay in some sort of a building, and everybody else got the better places to sleep, and I ended up with this crib, baby crib. That's better than nothing. And I remember the daughter coming in every morning, oh, my baby, and she'd grab me and hug me, which is silly, but she did. And then I remember, before you got to Germany, there was a period there they gave us leave. And you had a choice, Paris or Riviera. I took Riviera. And to make it real short, they had real nice hotels on the Riviera. And they had dinner tables where they had an orchestra playing music, and it was at Beethoven and that sort of thing, not rock and roll. And I had met a girl there. I don't know how, but she was way younger than me. But she talking to me, and she took me to meet her father and mother, and they wanted me to teach her English, which is impossible. I can't speak no French, and she can't speak no English, so that's ridiculous. But that night they were throwing a party in the hotel for the guys on leave. So I just invited them. And the French that were there, like her, the mother and father, at first they was bringing in goodies, whatever it was they had for the troops to pick on while they're dancing or whatever they're doing. And drinking, you know. You had beer. And the troops, they don't drink much. I mean, go for that little sandwiches, cutting little quarters. That wasn't what they did. But I know the French were very interested in that white bread, and the people that I had took, they was worrying about the bill. That was the big thing with them. How much is this costing, and how much are they going to pay? And a lot of the French was taking it and taking it home, you know, or whatever they done with it, putting it in their clothes, hiding it. Of course, I don't care. That was just a couple of days there that they gave you a break. And then if you want to wonder about how the people were, I think the people were friendly. But the other thing that struck me about Nice was big fancy motel right up the water. You go around back, little narrow streets, and poor, I mean poor, on up in there. And then people that I had invited to that, it was either the next day or that day later. The father took me out, decided he had to treat me as if I had paid for anything. I didn't, you know, but that's what he thought. And he took us to get a sandwich, and it was a piece of dark brown bread he bought somewhere with something in the middle. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't much. He paid a fortune for it. I don't know how much it was, but he paid a lot of money for it. And I remember the French, few houses there, they invite you in and they open up beer or whatever, wine. I mean, not beer. They didn't have beer or wine. And French wine's supposed to be the best in the world, supposed to be, but it turned out to be wine in bottles that had the cork floating around in it, and the like of that. It wasn't their best. And I guess you've heard that place, I don't know where it was, they got stopped, and I was there with about 6 or 7 others, and underneath this place, wherever it was, they had these big barrels of wine. It was a distillery or something there. And they got this French guy, and through this kind of language, which is the best language I found, I was asking him about it, and it's wine. He says it's only 20 years old, he says. It ain't ready. Well, anything that's 20 years old, you know, that's ready for them guys. And a good many of them went out and emptied all our water. Come back with them GI cans and filled up with that wine. But the other thing I remember about it is that wine, about the second or third day, I guess it was the next day, you drink wine, you don't get a drink of water. Brother, you begin to get sick of that stuff. End up getting rid of it. But you know how happy you are to get all the wine you can drink. But after you don't get no water, then that's enough of that stuff. And then somebody got the idea to shoot holes in the kegs, you know, so somebody coming behind don't get any. That was rotten, but that's what they done.
What about casualties? Anybody in your unit?
Yeah. I don't know the name. I was in an open field somehow. The vehicles were there, but I meant somehow we was in an open field and we were out of the vehicles. And then a plane come at us. And I've heard they don't go too fast today I've heard they didn't go over, what, 250, 300 miles an hour? But he come out of the sun, you don't hear him, you don't see him. And he coming, he had that machine gun going, and it went right along, and this other guy's standing right near me. And it got him, didn't get me. We're all standing. It happened so fast you can't even hardly fall to the ground. You know, it's there and gone. You don't get no chance at nothing. And then you say any other casualties, that Wojak that was with me in Sweetwater, he had been doing something wrong. They transferred him over to an infantry outfit, and he bunched up. That's what they tell me he did. He was a talker. He loved to talk. And somehow he got it. He didn't come back. I don't know what happened to the guy that was hit that was next to me. With that machine gun, I don't know how bad he was or nothing. The medics got him, you know.
What about your crew on your half track? Did you pretty much stay together throughout combat, the same group?
Oh, yeah. Well, the same ones. And there was one town we was on the move, and there was one road, I know. Somehow the division, we got stopped. The column got stopped. And it was night, and you kind of slept whenever you could. And one of them slept up on that canvas on the top of the roof, and instead he slept up there with the driver, and where the other one went, I don't know. I slept on that ammunition rack there, and it has them like things that stick up for cushions, and I got myself in between them all the time. If you got positioned just right, you could sleep there, and I did. But I remember that one night we was, I'd say, 150 foot from this bridge, and it was dark. You couldn't see nothing. It was just one of them kind of nights, it's cloudy, and you wouldn't see nothing. And this plane come over, and he kept coming over, and he's dropping bombs, but he wasn't after us, you know. We're just civilian people, and they ain't gonna waste a bomb on us. They was trying to blow that bridge. And of course we're all in the ditch, and the only thing I remember playing about them bombs, it hit. He never hit the bridge. It's all around the bridge he's hitting. And all that junk coming down and hitting us, you know. Trash from the bomb kept hitting us. And we all got it, that. But it scares you. I don't remember where that was. But then you was talking about going from there to Germany and the people. I think the French treated us good, but you didn't get to talk to many Germans.
What about German POWs? You encounter any of those?
Oh, yeah. That time they got that army, I don't remember where it was. Was it Colmar or what? But that German army surrendered, and there was more Germans there than we were, way more. But it was just like a family reunion, you know, in some ways of speaking, because we're moving along and looking down at them, and they're looking at us, and they're laughing, and they're going this way, you know, telling us we're going the wrong way, and laughing about it. They was laughing, and I guess we was laughing too, because we're both going in different directions, and they're walking toward the rear. And somehow I had got stopped and went over to some little place in the weeds. I don't know what I went over there for. me and another guy, to look at a little pond, and here two Germans jump up out of the weeds there around the pond. They had their guns, and they surrendered too. So he just told them to follow, point to the road, and get rid of their gun, break it, and keep going where they're. I guess somebody back there picks them up. There wasn't nothing you could do with them. Believe me, there was way more than what we. And at least we're that group that was with there. Thousands of them. And making a big joke out of it, you know.
Did you pick up any souvenirs from these prisoners?
No, I pretty well stayed away from that stuff. But then we was moving pretty well there, except for that stop I told you. And they were just laughing, and we was laughing. And the big joke was we're going the wrong way. And they seemed like they was happy to be heading the other way.
Any other incidents in terms of the combat period that you remember?
Yeah, I remember Colmar. And I remember this lady on the lawn. She had an artillery shell hit her lawn. It was dead, I guess. I don't know. Of all things, she's standing out there yelling and crying and everything else, wanting somebody to come get that shell off of her lawn. And then, of course, I remember the big railroad gun. I don't know what kind of building it was. It had a basement, and a couple of floors to it. But that's where I was myself. I seen that thing go up there, and I never seen a bomb that big. It blew whole works out down there. And that's when the radio operators were saying, them French, they were broadcasting on their radios, you know, like you learned in, was taught in school. You was taught so-and-so to so-and-so, break, I got a message, all this like happy nonsense. And they were broadcasting like that, where I could go, did it, and the other guy, he knew what I was talking about. And it wasn't no, you know, I got a message for you and all that happy nonsense, and we stayed off of them radios. Because we thought maybe them bombs they could get that railroad gun aimed at us. Well, I don't know whether they could or they couldn't. But they had the infantry outfits looking for it. And they, you know, the Germans could move that around them and wherever them tracks were or however it went. But I do know they were big bombs, and I know I went down in the basement of the building. I went down there, and I didn't know whether I should be down there or not. I went down there. Here's a whole bunch of French civilians, and an officer down there, and he's pretty well just talking with them. So I figured if he can be down here, I can too. So I stayed down there. The next day I went down to where that bombing hit, and the only thing that I remembered that stuck in my mind that I'll never forget it. You ever see them school picket fences around the schools? Iron fences? Have you ever seen them? Well, this was one that was fairly tall, and here's two bodies. I don't know what they are. They're human, that's all I know. And whatever it was picked them up and brought them down, and they were in the back was stuck into the forks of that fence. And there was two of them there. And that's as far as I went. I went back. I didn't see no more. But I remember that. I don't know why. The bomb must have picked them up, but they looked good. They're just hanging there. Somebody might have put them there. I don't know.
Of
course, after that, you went on over into Germany. And I wouldn't make it, from there on, I make it short. They had that bridge there. And our driver, he says, I can't go across that. No, I can't do it. He wasn't going to be able to make it. He made it, no problem about it. He made it. But that pontoon bridge, I never seen nothing like it. They had shaped like canoes. And then them planks go on them, and they're going like this, the whole thing. And I thought a lot of them German engineers or whatever they are, they're another kind of company, and builds them. And they had guys out there on the end of each one because they had the road, and then that canoe stuck out a little ways past it. And they're riding that up and down, and that thing's moving. And they're waving the vehicles on. And I guess the thing that I got struck with is where would Patton have got all these bridge builders and ack guns? He had hundreds of them there. Ack, to protect. Mm-hmm. Of course, they didn't fire. No shots were fired right on over the bridge. And I guess you can say it wasn't much after that. I knew the war was over, or would be, because we just started to roll, and you see airplanes on airfields. They didn't fly them away. You'd see tanks along the road, trucks along the road. Nothing wrong with this stuff. It wasn't blown, and some was, but there was a lot of brand new stuff laying around on the roads and all that. You knew that war wasn't going to last much. And then the other thing I can tell you about toward the end, I heard it on the radio and I heard it in the air. It must have been a lot of other outfits. I don't know who it was or nothing. But all of a sudden, all this ammunition started hitting the skies like fireworks. And the guy, whoever was at the front of the column, hollering in English, not code or nothing, "What's that? What's going on? What happened?" And they keep doing that. And nobody seemed to know. I didn't know. I figured that must be the end of the war. And all that ammunition was going off. And some of our guys even started firing. And it turns out that we just kept going, and it wasn't the end of the war. I have no explanation for it. Of course, the war ended right soon after that, real soon. I can't give you how many days or nothing, but it did.
What do you remember about finding out that the war is over? How did that happen?
That I don't know. I just, after seeing all them vehicles lining the roads, and all, I just knew it was over myself, coming to an end. I know that we was rolling along one of them autobahns, and there was different times that there was some Germans fired from the highway at us. But it was rolling so fast, I don't know, just almost nothing. And then we ended up in, what was it, Austria, or is that what they call it? Mm-hmm. And it must have been a ski resort. So that was really a beautiful place, And Germans ain't allowed to stay where, when you take over, they had to get out. But somehow somebody had made an agreement with somebody there that they could stay in that one room. And I remember her, I don't know how she found out my name was Smith. And her wife, she found out I was from Philadelphia. And she come out and she says, "I'm from Philadelphia." and she was looking for favors. I just wouldn't talk to her. But that was one beautiful building. I mean, it had like Grand Central Station toilets, you know, with lines up loose and real fancy faucets, all that stuff. It must have been quite a ski resort.
So what happened then? What'd you do once the war's over?
Well, ain't much of a story. We drove back to Heidenheim, and the master sergeant, I believe, come out, and we lined up, and he says, all right, now, something, I don't remember the exact words, but basic training starts in the morning. And, of course, nobody paid any attention to it, but, you know, training starts in the morning. This is almost ridiculous. But it didn't, you know, it never come about. And, I mean, that was a funny thing for somebody to say. And then I remember we went to catch the boat. After they split us all up for some reason, they attached me to an MP outfit. Of course, I never seen an MP or nothing. It's just, that's what it was. And they took us to this field, and it was a place in France there. And the only thing I remember there, we got a building, and then they told us that the ship was delayed because of tornadoes and all that around. Well, believe it or not, I'm at the door looking out, and all of a sudden, here's this roof coming through the air. And the roof hit our building. And it collapsed completely. And we're all standing there, and anybody hurt? Anybody hurt? No. And the only thing that was still going was the fireplace. The fire was burning. Of course, then after that, we got a ship back. Some got better ships than others, I guess.
How'd you find your wife? I mean, in other words, did you go back to Philadelphia, or did you come get her, or what?
I went to Philadelphia. Pretty well just said hello overnight. I told my father I'm going to go to, what was the name of that town? Where she was.
Sweetwater.
Yeah. Little Rock. Yeah, Little Rock. She had been transferred up there. But when you got to that place where you first arrived, they had telephone operators for every individual soldier. They provided a telephone booth, and they would find your number, and they did, to let you make a call. And I had called her and thought I was coming. I went after her, and I brought her back with me. And I don't think you mentioned marriage. We got on a train and headed back to Philadelphia. And I told my father we was going to go out and get married. And he said, well, why not have the ceremony here? And he contacted the minister, and we got married right there. It was kind of funny to do that.
Well, is there anything else now that we've taken you from the beginning to the end of the war?
The only other thing I remember is she contacted Western Union either before or after we got here. I don't remember which it was. Western Union says, you still got a job. You're going to Philadelphia. She had a job in Philadelphia waiting for her. I went back to the Philadelphia Transportation Company to see if I was still working or if they had anything. And they told me, yeah, but all my seniority went right along with me. And then I was now first class. And so they treated me right. I had all my raises went along with me. So I don't remember when I got the raises, but they had given me all my raises. So here I am, a first-class mechanic, and I worked for him after that. And she worked for Western Union till we moved to New Jersey. She didn't like the city, so we went to, more or less, I don't know if you know much about New Jersey, but at that time when I was young, there was no way of getting to New Jersey except through a ferry. And they had built a bridge, and New Jersey was like known pretty well as a swamp, and you got to cross the river, and then you could catch a train to Atlantic City and them resorts. And people that went to Atlantic City from Philadelphia, it was a couple days trip, down there and back and all. It turned out to be quite a trip today. The highways there, and 80 miles, you go across the bridge and you're there. A few hours, a couple hours, but it's a big difference. We went down there and bought a house, got a place.
Well, thank you very much. This is the end of the interview.
Told you it wasn't much.
Go ahead and shut it down.